The afternoon sun hung low over the settlement of New Haven, casting long shadows across the dusty streets and prefabricated housing units that made up the human colony on the edge of Sector 47. It was the kind of place the Galactic Federation had forgotten about decades ago, a dumping ground for refugees, failed entrepreneurs, and families who couldn't afford passage to the core worlds. The air smelled of rust, recycled water, and the faint chemical tang of cheap fusion cells. Ethan Cole wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that was more oil than fabric, squinting at the ancient hovercart engine he'd been trying to resurrect for the better part of 3 hours. At 17, he'd already learned that nothing in New Haven worked the way it was supposed to. Everything was broken, patched, broken again, and patched with whatever scraps could be scavenged from the scrapyard on the colony's western edge. "Ethan, you still here?" The voice belonged to Marcus, the owner of the repair shop, a squat building with a corrugated metal roof that rattled whenever the wind picked up. Marcus was in his 50s, with a face weathered by years of disappointment and a back that ached from bending over broken machinery. He treated Ethan well enough, paying him under the table when he could, letting him take home spare parts when his mother needed something fixed. "Just finishing up, Marcus," Ethan called back, tightening a coupling with a wrench that was 2 sizes too large. "This coil's shot, but I think I can get another month out of it if we bypass the secondary regulator." Marcus grunted his approval. "Good kid. Lock up when you're done. I've got to get home before Lena starts threatening divorce again." Ethan smiled faintly. Marcus's wife had been threatening divorce for as long as Ethan had worked there, but everyone knew she'd never go through with it. Love in New Haven was stubborn, clinging to life the same way the colonists did, out of sheer spite against a universe that wanted them to give up. By the time Ethan finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first of the colony's streetlights flickered to life, those that still worked anyway. He pocketed the small credit chit Marcus had left on the workbench, locked the shop, and started the 20-minute walk home. His mother would be waiting, probably with a reheated meal of synth protein and whatever vegetables she'd managed to coax from the hydroponic garden she tended in their tiny apartment. His mother, Sarah Cole. She'd been a teacher once, back on Earth, before the economic collapse that had forced them off-world. Now she worked double shifts at the colony's supply depot, sorting cargo and managing inventory for a wage that barely covered rent. She never complained, never let Ethan see how tired she was, but he saw it anyway, in the lines around her eyes, in the way her shoulders sagged when she thought he wasn't looking. He cut through the greenway, a stretch of engineered grass and scraggly trees that the colony planners had optimistically called a park. In truth, it was little more than a dirt path beside a man-made lake fed by runoff from the water treatment plant. The lake was murky, its surface rippling in the evening breeze, surrounded by reeds and the occasional flash of bioluminescent algae that glowed faintly in the twilight. Ethan was halfway across the greenway when he heard it, a sound like thunder, distant but growing closer. He stopped, tilting his head toward the sky. The noise grew louder, a deep resonant hum that vibrated in his chest. Then he saw it, a ship, massive and gleaming, descending far too fast through the atmosphere. It was a luxury cruiser, the kind that belonged to the wealthy core-worlders who never set foot in places like New Haven. Its hull was polished to a mirror shine, etched with intricate designs that caught the dying light. But something was wrong. The ship's trajectory was erratic, its stabilizers firing in chaotic bursts, trailing smoke and sparks. Ethan's breath caught. The ship was going to crash. He watched, frozen, as the vessel careened over the colony, missing the housing blocks by mere meters before slamming into the far side of the lake with a sound like the sky breaking open. The impact sent a wall of water surging outward, drenching the reeds and flooding the path. The ship's forward section crumpled, half submerged, while the aft end jutted into the air at a sharp angle, smoke pouring from ruptured conduits. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the hiss of steam and the groan of stressed metal. Then Ethan heard something else, a voice faint and desperate, crying out in a language he didn't recognize. He didn't think. He just ran. The water was cold and filthy, soaking through his boots and jeans as he splashed toward the wreckage. The ship's emergency lights flickered weakly, illuminating twisted corridors and shattered viewports. Ethan climbed onto a piece of debris, pulling himself toward the source of the voice. His hands slipped on the wet metal, his heart hammering in his chest. Then he saw her. She was floating face down in the water, her long dark hair fanned out around her like seaweed. Her skin was a pale lavender, almost luminous in the dim light, and she wore a flowing gown that clung to her body, heavy with water. Her abdomen was swollen, pregnant, unmistakably so. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dove in, the cold shock of the water stealing his breath, and wrapped an arm around her torso, dragging her toward the shore. She was heavier than she looked, and the water resisted him, pulling at his clothes, his limbs. His muscles screamed in protest, but he forced himself to keep moving, one stroke at a time until his feet found solid ground. He hauled her onto the muddy bank, rolling her onto her back. Her eyes were closed, her lips tinged blue. She wasn't breathing. Ethan's mind raced. He'd taken a first aid course 2 years ago, part of a community program his mother had insisted he attend. He'd thought it was a waste of time back then. Now he thanked every star in the galaxy for it. He tilted her head back, checked her airway, clear. He placed his hands on her chest just below the sternum and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head, trying to remember the rhythm. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. Her chest rose and fell under his hands, but she didn't respond. "Come on," he muttered, his voice tight with desperation. "Come on, breathe." He gave her 2 more breaths, his lips pressed to hers, tasting lake water and something faintly metallic. Then he resumed compressions, harder this time, ignoring the ache in his arms. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. Suddenly, she convulsed, coughing violently, water spilling from her mouth. Her eyes flew open, large, almond-shaped, the color of molten gold. She gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Ethan sat back on his heels, relief flooding through him so intensely he felt dizzy. "You're okay," he said, his voice shaking. "You're going to be okay." She stared at him, her golden eyes wide with confusion and fear. She said something in that same alien language, her voice hoarse and broken. Ethan shook his head, holding up his hands in a gesture he hoped was universal. "I don't understand," he said, "but you're safe. You're safe now." She reached up, her fingers trembling, and touched his face, a gesture of gratitude or disbelief, or both. Then her eyes rolled back and she slumped against him, unconscious but breathing. Ethan held her, his heart still racing, staring at the wreckage of the ship and wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. He didn't have to wonder for long. The air above the lake shimmered, and a fleet of smaller craft descended, sleek, black, bristling with weapons. They landed in a semicircle around the wreck, their boarding ramps hissing open. Figures emerged, tall and imposing, clad in armor that gleamed like liquid silver. They were Draxians, Ethan realized with a jolt of fear. He'd seen them on the news feeds, read about them in history files. They were one of the Federation's dominant species, wealthy, powerful, and utterly disdainful of humanity. At the center of the group was a figure who could only be their leader. He was taller than the rest, his skin a deep blue silver that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. His eyes were sharp and cold, the color of ice, and his features were angular and aristocratic. He wore robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver thread, and a cloak that billowed behind him as he strode toward the wreckage. His presence was commanding, almost regal, and the soldiers around him moved with the precision of those who knew the cost of failure. The Draxian's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the destroyed ship, the muddy bank, and finally settling on Ethan, a human boy, soaked and filthy, cradling an unconscious alien woman in his arms. The leader stopped. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Shock, perhaps, or disbelief. "Ceres," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan looked down at the woman in his arms, then back at the Draxian. He didn't need a translator to understand what he was seeing. This was her husband, and judging by the look on the alien's face, Ethan had just saved the life of someone very, very important. The Draxian moved with the kind of purpose that made the air itself seem to part before him. His boots made no sound on the wet ground, but every step carried the weight of absolute authority. The soldiers flanking him kept their weapons trained on Ethan, though their leader had not given an order to fire. Yet, Ethan's arms tightened instinctively around the unconscious woman. Ceres, the Draxian had called her. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He'd just pulled someone important out of a lake, someone married to what appeared to be an alien warlord or nobleman, and now he was sitting in the mud, soaked to the bone, surrounded by armed soldiers who looked at him the way someone might look at an insect they were deciding whether to crush. The leader stopped 3 meters away, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Ceres. For a moment his expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for Ethan to see something beneath the cold exterior. Fear, raw, undisguised fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the same imperious mask. "You will release her," the Draxian said. His voice was deep, accented, each word precisely enunciated. He spoke in standard galactic, the trade language most species used, though his tone made it clear he considered even speaking to a human beneath him. Immediately, Ethan looked down at Ceres, then back at the alien. "She's unconscious. She needs medical attention. I pulled her out of the water. She wasn't breathing. I did not ask for an explanation," the Draxian interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. "I gave you an order. Release my wife." The soldiers shifted, their weapons humming with charge. Ethan swallowed hard but didn't move. "I'm not trying to hurt her. I saved her. Look, she's breathing now, but she needs to be checked by a medic. She's pregnant, and the stress—" The Draxian's eyes flashed. In 2 strides he closed the distance between them and dropped to one knee beside Ceres, his hands moving to her face with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his demeanor. He murmured something in his own language, his voice soft and urgent, then pressed 2 fingers to her throat, checking her pulse. His jaw tightened. "Medical team now," he barked without looking away from his wife. "Full scan. Prep the emergency bay." 2 Draxians in white and silver medical uniforms rushed forward, carrying a hovering stretcher. Ethan reluctantly let them take Ceres, watching as they secured her onto the anti-grav platform and began running diagnostic scans with handheld devices that emitted soft blue light. One of them, a female with pale purple skin and silver markings along her temples, looked up at the leader. "Vitals are stable, Commander Korath," she reported. "Elevated stress markers, minor hypothermia, but the child appears unharmed. She's breathing on her own." Whoever performed the resuscitation knew what they were doing. The leader, Commander Korath apparently, turned his gaze back to Ethan. The boy was still sitting in the mud, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Korath studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You," he said finally. "Human. What is your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole." Korath repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. "You claim you saved my wife." "I didn't claim anything," Ethan said quietly. "I did save her. She was drowning. I pulled her out and gave her CPR until she started breathing again." One of the soldiers muttered something in Draxian, his tone derisive. Ethan didn't need a translation to understand the contempt. Another soldier laughed, a short, sharp sound. Korath raised one hand, and the mocking stopped instantly. He rose to his full height, easily 2 meters tall, towering over Ethan even as the boy scrambled to his feet. Up close, Korath was even more imposing. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his skin the color of polished steel with faint iridescent undertones. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, cold and calculating. He wore wealth the way others wore skin, naturally, carelessly, as if it were his birthright. "You are certain of this?" Korath asked. "You performed this CPR? Not one of your colony's medical personnel?" "There weren't any around," Ethan said, brushing mud off his jeans. "Your ship crashed into the lake. I was the only one here. I heard her calling out, went into the water, and pulled her to shore. She wasn't breathing, so I did compressions and rescue breaths until she coughed up the water." Korath's gaze flicked to the medical officer, who nodded. "The timeline is consistent, Commander. Given the temperature of the water and the duration of submersion we detected, another 2 minutes, and we would have lost both of them." The words hung in the air. Ethan watched as something shifted in Korath's expression, something he couldn't quite name. The Draxian looked back at him, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw confusion there, or perhaps discomfort. "I see," Korath said slowly. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small data pad, his fingers moving across the surface with practiced ease. "You will be compensated for your service. Standard rescue protocols dictate a finder's fee. I am prepared to offer 50,000 credits, transferred immediately to your account." Ethan blinked. 50,000 credits. That was more money than his mother made in 2 years. That was enough to fix the water filtration system in their apartment block, to buy real food instead of synth protein, to pay off the medical debt from when his father had died. It was a fortune. And yet, something about the way Korath said it, so casually, so dismissively as if he were tipping a waiter, made Ethan's stomach turn. "I don't want your money," he heard himself say. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the soldiers stopped moving, their heads turning in unison to stare at him. Korath's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed fractionally. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. Ethan's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to meet the Draxian's gaze. "I said I don't want your money. I didn't pull your wife out of the water because I wanted a reward. I did it because she needed help." One of the soldiers laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Another muttered something that sounded like an insult. Korath silenced them with a glance, then turned his full attention back to Ethan. "You refuse compensation," he said slowly, as if trying to parse the meaning of the words. 50,000 credits. You refuse. "Yes. Then what is it you want, Ethan Cole?" Korath's tone was flat, almost clinical. "Everyone wants something. Name your price, and I will consider it." Ethan hesitated. He thought of his mother, working double shifts. He thought of the neighbors in their building, the Martinez family with 3 kids, the elderly Mr. Chen who coughed all night because of the mold in the ventilation. He thought of the clinic on 8th Street, the one that served the poorest families in the colony, where the water filtration system had been broken for 3 weeks and children were getting sick from drinking contaminated water. "There's a medical clinic in the colony," Ethan said, "on 8th Street. Their water filter broke down and they can't afford to replace it. People are getting sick, kids mostly. If you really want to repay me, fix that. Get them a new filter, or repair the old one. That's what I want." The silence returned, heavier this time. Korath stared at him as if he'd just spoken in an alien language, which in a way he had. The Draxian's brow furrowed, genuine confusion crossing his features. "A water filter," he repeated. "Yes. For a clinic that serves humans. Yes." Korath looked at the medical officer, then at his soldiers as if seeking confirmation that he'd heard correctly. The medical officer shrugged slightly, clearly as baffled as her commander. Korath turned back to Ethan, his expression hardening. "You understand the value of what I am offering," he said. 50,000 credits, enough to improve your circumstances considerably, enough to leave this place." He gestured vaguely at the colony, his distaste evident. "And you wish to spend it on a broken machine for people you do not even know." "They're not strangers," Ethan said. "They're my neighbors. And yeah, that's what I want. If you're serious about compensating me, that's how you do it." Korath studied him for a long moment, his ice-blue eyes searching Ethan's face as if looking for deception, for some hidden angle. But there was none. The boy was sincere, impossibly, incomprehensibly sincere. "This makes no sense," Korath said finally, more to himself than to Ethan. "You saved my wife, my unborn child. I offer you wealth, and you ask for charity." "I'm asking for something that matters," Ethan said quietly. "Money would help me. A new filter would help a lot of people." For a moment, Korath said nothing. Then he turned away, his cloak billowing behind him as he walked back toward the medical team. "Very well," he said over his shoulder. "I will have the filter repaired." "Consider it done," Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "Thank you." Korath stopped. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed. "Do not thank me, human. This is a transaction, nothing more. I do not appreciate being made to feel indebted." He gestured to his soldiers. "Secure the wreckage. I want a full report on what caused the malfunction, and someone bring this boy a thermal blanket before he catches hypothermia. I will not have it said that I left a rescuer to freeze." One of the soldiers approached Ethan, holding out a silver blanket that shimmered with embedded heating filaments. Ethan took it, wrapping it around his shoulders, the warmth seeping into his chilled skin. The soldier's expression was carefully neutral, but Ethan caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or disdain. It was hard to tell. Korath watched as the medical team loaded Ceres into one of the shuttlecraft, his hand resting briefly on the edge of the stretcher, before they secured her inside. Then he turned back to Ethan one last time. "You are a fool, Ethan Cole," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "but you are a fool who saved what I value most in this universe. For that, I will honor your ridiculous request. The filter will be replaced within the day." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "Try not to drown before then." With that, he turned and strode toward the shuttle, his soldiers falling into formation behind him. The craft lifted off in perfect synchronization, their engines humming as they rose into the darkening sky, leaving Ethan alone on the muddy bank with a thermal blanket and the wreckage of a ship that had, for a few brief moments, brought his world and theirs crashing together. Ethan watched them go, his mind still reeling. Then he turned and started the long walk home, wondering if Commander Korath would actually keep his word, and wondering, too, Why a man who commanded so much power seemed so utterly baffled by a simple act of kindness. He didn't know it yet, but that confusion would change everything. Ethan didn't tell his mother about the crash until he was sitting at their small kitchen table, picking at a bowl of reheated synth stew that tasted vaguely of vegetables that had never actually existed. Sarah Cole stood at the counter, her back to him, washing dishes in water that ran brown for the first few seconds before clearing. She was still wearing her work uniform, a grey jumpsuit with the Colony Supply Depot logo stitched on the back. "So you're soaked through," she said without turning around. "What happened? Fall in the lake?" Ethan hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying. His mother had a way of extracting the truth that would have made her an excellent interrogator in another life. "There was a crash, a ship. It went down in the lake while I was walking home." Sarah turned, her eyes widening. "Are you hurt? Was anyone—" "I'm fine, Mom. I pulled someone out. A woman. She's okay." His mother crossed the small kitchen in 3 steps, her hands cupping his face, turning his head left and right as if checking for injuries. "Ethan James Cole, you tell me everything right now." So he did. He told her about the luxury cruiser, about finding Ceres in the water, about the CPR and the soldiers and the towering Draxian commander who'd offered him a fortune and looked at him like he was an alien specimen when he'd asked for a water filter instead. When he finished, his mother sank into the chair across from him, her expression caught between pride and exasperation. "You turned down 50,000 credits. Yeah, for a water filter. For the clinic, Mom. The one on 8th Street. The Martinez kids have been sick for 2 weeks because—" "I know why, honey." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Her palms were rough from work, her knuckles swollen. "I'm not angry, I'm just— You're 17. You shouldn't have to think about things like broken water filters and sick children. You should be worried about school, about friends, about a future that doesn't exist. If we can't even drink clean water," Ethan said quietly. His mother's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away and squeezed his hand. "You have your father's heart," she said softly. "Too big for your own good." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the ventilation system rattling overhead. Then Sarah stood, pulling him up with her. "Come on, let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. And tomorrow you're going to check on that clinic and see if your alien commander actually keeps his word." Ethan nodded, but he wasn't hopeful. Men like Veyron Korath didn't keep promises to people like him. That was just how the galaxy worked. He was wrong. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of heavy machinery and raised voices outside. He stumbled to the window, still half asleep, and stared at the scene unfolding in the street below. A massive hover truck was parked in front of the building, its cargo bay open, and a team of workers in pristine grey uniforms were unloading equipment. Sleek, expensive-looking equipment that gleamed in the morning sun. Ethan threw on his clothes and ran downstairs, his mother close behind him. A small crowd had already gathered, neighbors in worn bathrobes and patched work clothes, staring at the spectacle with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Mrs. Martinez stood at the front, her youngest daughter clinging to her leg. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, pushing through the crowd. One of the workers, a human surprisingly with a shaved head and a datapad in his hands, looked up. "We're here to install a new water filtration system for the medical clinic on 8th Street. Someone want to point me in the right direction." "The clinic's 3 blocks that way," Mr. Chen said, pointing with a gnarled finger. "But who sent you? We didn't order anything. Can't afford it." The worker consulted his datapad. "Order came in last night. Fully paid, installation included. Customer name is Veyron Korath. Says here it's a priority repair. No expense spared." The crowd erupted in whispers. Ethan felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, her grip tight with disbelief. "He actually did it," she murmured. The worker looked at Ethan, recognition dawning on his face. "You Ethan Cole?" "Yeah. Got a message for you." He tapped the datapad, and a hollow projection flickered to life. A brief text message in crisp, formal script. "The filter has been replaced. Consider your request fulfilled. Do not contact me again. V. Korath." Ethan read it twice, something warm and uncomfortable settling in his chest. The commander had kept his word. More than that, he hadn't just repaired the old filter. He'd installed a brand new system, state-of-the-art, the kind of equipment that belonged in core world hospitals, not forgotten colonies like New Haven. "Well," the worker said, collapsing the hollow, "let's get this installed. We've got 4 more stops after this one." "4 more," Ethan echoed. The worker grinned. "Yeah, your commander friend didn't stop at one clinic. He's upgrading the water systems in every public building in this sector. Schools, medical centers, community halls. Guess he figured if he was going to fix one, he might as well fix them all. The crowd fell silent. Then Mrs. Martinez started crying, her hands covering her mouth as she sank to her knees. Mr. Chen's eyes were wet, his weathered face crumpling. Someone else started clapping, and then everyone was clapping, the sound echoing off the buildings. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Veyron Korath, a man who'd looked at him with such open disdain, who'd called him a fool, had done this, not because he wanted gratitude, judging by the brusque message, but because he'd made a promise? Because he felt obligated? Or because for the first time in a very long time, someone had asked him to help people instead of enriching himself? The workers moved with military efficiency, and by midday, the clinic on 8th Street had a functioning water system for the first time in a month. The lead physician, a tired woman named Dr. Parrish, stood in the doorway, watching as clean, clear water poured from the taps, her hands shaking. "This is a miracle," she whispered. "I've been begging the colonial administration for help for weeks. They said there was no budget. And then this. Who is Veyron Korath?" "He's a Draxian," Ethan said quietly. "A rich one. I did him a favor and he paid me back." "Some favor," Dr. Parrish said. She looked at Ethan, her eyes sharp. "Whatever you did, thank you. You've probably saved lives today." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Korath's message, the curt dismissal, the order not to contact him again. The commander had done what Ethan asked, but he clearly wanted nothing more to do with him. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something. That feeling intensified 3 days later, when a sleek black shuttle descended onto the colony's landing pad, the same shuttle Ethan had seen at the crash site. He was at Marcus's shop when the news spread, and by the time he reached the pad, a crowd had already gathered. Veyron Korath stepped out of the shuttle, flanked by 2 guards. He was dressed more casually today, or what passed for casual among Draxian nobility. His robes were dark green instead of midnight blue, and he wore no cloak. But his presence was no less commanding. He scanned the crowd with those ice-blue eyes, and when his gaze landed on Ethan, he stopped. "You," Korath said, his voice carrying across the pad. "Ethan Cole, I need to speak with you." The crowd parted like water, and Ethan found himself walking forward, his heart pounding. Up close, Korath looked different, tired, perhaps. There were faint shadows under his eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. "Commander," Ethan said carefully. "Is something wrong? Is your wife—" "Ceres is recovering," Korath interrupted. "The child is healthy. That is not why I am here." He gestured to the shuttle. "Get in. We need to talk." Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the crowd. His mother was there, her face pale with worry. Korath followed his gaze, his expression softening fractionally. "He will be returned unharmed," Korath said, addressing Sarah directly. "You have my word." Sarah looked at Ethan, a question in her eyes. Ethan nodded and she let him go, though her hands were clenched into fists. The shuttle's interior was everything Ethan had imagined and more. Plush seating, ambient lighting, surfaces that gleamed like polished obsidian. Korath sat across from him, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "You have caused me a great deal of inconvenience, Ethan Cole," Korath said once they were airborne. Ethan blinked. What? How?" "Since I fulfilled your request, my staff has been inundated with inquiries. Other colonies, other settlements, all asking why I suddenly care about human infrastructure. My business partners are confused. My rivals are suspicious. And my wife—" He paused, something flickering across his face. "My wife insists I meet you again, to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Ethan said. "You fixed the filters. That was more than enough." "That is what I told her," Korath said. "But Ceres is persuasive. She wants to see the human who saved her life. And when my wife wants something, I have learned it is easier to comply than to argue." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "So I am here against my better judgment to extend an invitation. Ceres wishes to meet you, properly, in our home, tomorrow evening." Ethan stared at him. "You want me to come to your house?" "I do not want anything," Korath said sharply. "But Ceres does. And for reasons I cannot fathom, she believes you are worth knowing. So will you come, or must I return and tell my pregnant wife that the human who saved her cannot be bothered?" There was an edge to his voice, frustration, confusion, maybe even a hint of desperation. Ethan realized with a jolt that Veyron Korath was not accustomed to asking for things. He was accustomed to commanding, to purchasing, to taking. This awkward, uncomfortable request was foreign territory. "I'll come," Ethan said, "if it means that much to her." Korath nodded, standing. "A transport will arrive at your residence at 6. Do not be late. Ceres dislikes tardiness." As the shuttle descended back toward the landing pad, Korath spoke again, his voice quieter. "You should know, Ethan Cole, that I still do not understand you. I do not understand what you did or why, but my wife is alive because of you. For that I owe you a debt I cannot repay with credits." He met Ethan's eyes, and for the first time, there was no disdain there, only uncertainty. "Perhaps," Korath said slowly, "that is why Ceres insists I try." The transport arrived exactly at 6, descending from the sky like a falling star. It was smaller than the military shuttles Ethan had seen at the crash site, but no less impressive, sleek and silver, with lines so smooth it looked like it had been carved from a single piece of metal. The neighbors gathered to watch as Ethan climbed aboard, dressed in the only decent clothes he owned, a button-down shirt his mother had pressed 3 times, and a pair of dark pants that were only slightly frayed at the cuffs. Sarah had hugged him tightly before he left, whispering in his ear, "Remember who you are. Don't let them make you feel small." Now, sitting in the transport's passenger compartment, Ethan tried to take his mother's advice. But it was hard not to feel small when everything around him screamed wealth beyond imagination. The seats were upholstered in some kind of exotic leather that adjusted to his body temperature. Soft music played from hidden speakers, a haunting melody in a minor key. Through the viewport, he watched as New Haven fell away below him, the colony shrinking until it was just a smudge of grey against the rust-colored landscape. The transport climbed higher, passing through a layer of clouds, and then Ethan saw it, the Korath estate. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a palace, a statement of power carved into the top of a mountain that overlooked the entire region. The main structure was built from dark stone that seemed to absorb light, with towers that reached toward the sky and gardens that terraced down the mountainside in cascading levels of green. Force fields shimmered around the perimeter, and landing pads dotted the grounds like stepping stones. As the transport descended, Ethan caught glimpses of fountains, sculptures, and what looked like a private spaceport with half a dozen ships docked in gleaming rows. He'd known Korath was wealthy. He hadn't understood what that meant until now. The transport landed on a platform near the main entrance, and the door hissed open. A figure was waiting, a Draxian woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant braid, wearing a crisp uniform of deep purple. She bowed slightly as Ethan stepped out. "Ethan Cole?" she asked, her voice formal but not unkind. "Yes, ma'am. I am Veyron, head of household staff. Lady Ceres is expecting you. Please follow me." She led him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, each one more opulent than the last. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting alien landscapes and historic battles. The floors were polished stone, inlaid with precious metals that formed intricate patterns. Everywhere Ethan looked, he saw evidence of wealth that most humans in the colonies would never even dream of, art that could feed a family for years, furniture that cost more than entire buildings. They passed other staff members, servants in livery, guards in armor, a pair of Draxian children who stared at Ethan with undisguised curiosity before their nanny hurried them away. No one spoke to him directly, but he felt their eyes on him, assessing, wondering what a human was doing in the Korath estate. Finally, Veyron stopped before a set of double doors carved with images of flowering vines. She knocked once, then pushed them open. "Lady Ceres, your guest has arrived." The room beyond was a solarium, its walls made almost entirely of transparent panels that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. The late afternoon sun streamed through, casting golden light across furniture upholstered in soft cream and pale blue. Plants filled every corner, real plants, not the scraggly hydroponic specimens Ethan was used to, but lush flowering things that filled the air with a sweet, earthy scent. And there, seated on a curved sofa with cushions piled around her, was Ceres. She looked better than she had on the lakeshore, vastly better. Her lavender skin glowed with health, and her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders. She wore a flowing gown of pale green that accommodated her pregnant belly, and her golden eyes sparkled with warmth as she saw him. She smiled, and Ethan felt some of his nervousness ease. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft and musical. She spoke in standard galactic, her accent lilting. "Please come in, sit. You have no idea how much I have wanted to meet you properly." Ethan stepped inside, acutely aware of how out of place he was. Veyron withdrew, closing the doors behind her. Ceres gestured to a chair across from her, and Ethan sat, perching on the edge as if afraid he might break something. "You saved my life," Ceres said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I remember pieces of it. The water, the cold. I remember thinking I was going to die. And then I woke up and they told me a human boy pulled me from the lake and brought me back. They said you refused payment." "I didn't need payment," Ethan said quietly. "You needed help. That's all." Ceres studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "My husband says you are a fool, that you do not understand the value of what you did." Ethan felt his face flush. "He said that to you?" "He did. But I know Veyron well enough to understand what he means when he calls someone a fool." She leaned forward slightly, her hand resting on her belly. "He means he does not understand you, and what Veyron does not understand, he dismisses. It is easier that way." She paused, then added, "He also kept your request. Not just the filter you asked for, but many more. He spent more in a single day improving your colony's infrastructure than he has spent on charity in his entire life. And he is deeply, deeply uncomfortable about it." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "I kind of got that impression." Ceres laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "He is a complicated man, my husband. Brilliant, driven, capable of great things. But he was raised to believe that compassion is weakness, that generosity is a transaction, and that people like you," she gestured gently at him, "are beneath his notice. You have challenged all of that in the span of a single conversation. It terrifies him." "I didn't mean to scare anyone," Ethan said. "I just wanted to help." "I know," Ceres said softly. "That is what makes it so powerful." She reached for a tray on the low table beside her, lifting a delicate porcelain pot. "Tea? It is from my homeworld. The leaves only grow in the high mountains, and they must be picked at dawn. Veyron had it imported specially." Ethan accepted the cup she poured, the liquid inside a deep amber color that steamed gently. It smelled like flowers and honey. He sipped it carefully, the warmth spreading through him. "Ceres," he said after a moment, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you want to meet me? I mean, really, your husband already paid me back." "You don't owe me anything." Ceres set down her own cup, her expression growing serious. "Because I wanted to see the person who saved my child's life and asked for nothing in return. Because in the days since the accident, I have heard stories about you. Small things, whispers from the staff who made inquiries. They say you work to help your mother, that you volunteer at a community center when you have free time, that your neighbors speak of you with respect and affection. I wanted to know if those stories were true." She smiled, "And now I see that they are. You are exactly what you appear to be, Ethan Cole. And in a galaxy where everyone wears a mask, that is rarer than you know." Before Ethan could respond, the doors opened. Veyron Korath strode in, still wearing his business attire, dark robes with silver threading, his expression as unreadable as ever. He stopped when he saw them, his gaze flicking between his wife and Ethan. "You are early," Ceres said, her tone teasing. "I thought you had meetings until 8. "I cancelled them," Korath said curtly. He looked at Ethan. "I see you accepted the invitation. Your wife is very persuasive," Ethan said carefully. Korath's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He crossed to Ceres, bending to press a kiss to her forehead before settling into the chair beside her. Up close, Ethan noticed the lines of tension around his eyes, the set of his jaw. This was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders, and it showed. "Veyron," Ceres said gently, "I was just telling Ethan how grateful we are." "I'm aware," Korath said. He looked at Ethan, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Korath sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "My wife believes I should apologize to you." "For what?" Ethan asked, genuinely confused. "For calling you a fool, for treating you with disdain, for—" He hesitated, as if the words were physically difficult to say. "For failing to recognize the value of what you did." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to apologize. You kept your promise. That's more than most people would do. Most people," Korath said slowly, "are not trying to understand why a human child would risk his life for a stranger and then refuse a fortune." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "So explain it to me, Ethan Cole. Make me understand. Why did you do it?" Ethan set down his cup, gathering his thoughts. "Because she needed help," he said simply. "And because if I didn't help her, no one else would. It wasn't about who she was or who you are. It was just The right thing to do. The right thing, Korath repeated as if tasting the phrase. And the filter? That was also the right thing. Yes, people were suffering. You had the power to stop it. So I asked you to. That's all. Korath leaned back, his expression troubled. In my culture, Ethan, everything is a transaction. Power is earned through strength, wealth, and influence. Compassion is something you show to your family, your clan, not to strangers, and certainly not to those beneath your station. He paused. You have turned that worldview upside down, and I find myself questioning things I have never questioned before. Ceres reached over and took her husband's hand, squeezing it gently. That is not a bad thing, my love. It is deeply inconvenient, Korath muttered, but there was no real heat in his words. He looked at Ethan again. Ceres wishes to repay you, properly. She has several ideas, all of which I find excessive but have been overruled on. His lips quirked. Apparently, saving one's wife grants one significant leverage in household decisions. Ceres laughed. I want to establish a scholarship fund for human students in this sector, enough to send 20 children to university each year, fully funded, and I want you to help me administer it. Ethan's breath caught. Me? I don't know anything about running a scholarship fund. You know who needs help, Ceres said. You understand your community in ways we never could. That makes you the perfect person for this. And before you refuse, Korath added, his tone wry, know that my wife has already made arrangements. The fund will be created whether you agree to help or not. Your involvement would simply make it more effective. Ethan looked between them. Ceres with her warm smile, Korath with his guarded but genuine expression, and felt something shift inside him. These were not the cold, distant aliens he'd been taught to expect. They were people, complicated, flawed, struggling to understand a universe that didn't always make sense. Okay, he said quietly. I'll help. Ceres's smile widened, and even Korath looked relieved. Good, the commander said. Then it is settled. You will return next week, and we will begin discussing the details. He stood, straightening his robes. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to attend to. Ethan, you are welcome to stay for dinner. Ceres has informed the kitchen staff that we have a guest. As Korath moved toward the door, he paused, glancing back. One more thing, Ethan Cole. Thank you. For my wife, for my child, for everything. The words were stiff, formal, but there was sincerity beneath them. Ethan nodded, and Korath left, the doors closing behind him. Ceres sighed contentedly. He is trying, she said. That is more than I dared hope for a week ago. Ethan smiled. He's not so bad, just out of practice. At being human, Ceres teased. At being kind, Ethan corrected. But I think he's learning. Outside the windows, the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time since the crash, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, something good might come from all of this after all. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan found himself drawn into a world he'd never imagined he'd be part of. He returned to the Korath estate twice more, each visit revealing new layers to both the family and their empire. Ceres was warm and welcoming, treating him not as a curiosity, but as a friend. She asked him about his life, his mother, his dreams. She listened when he spoke about the struggles of the colony, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. Veyron remained more distant, but there was a subtle shift in how he treated Ethan. The disdain had vanished, replaced by something closer to cautious respect. He would sit in on their meetings about the scholarship fund, offering practical advice, occasionally challenging Ethan's suggestions, not to dismiss them, but to strengthen them. It was clear that the commander was a brilliant businessman, capable of seeing angles and opportunities that Ethan would never have considered, but it was also clear that he was struggling with something deeper. You look at the world differently than I do, Korath said one evening, as they stood on one of the estate's balconies, watching the sun set over the valley. Ceres had retired early, tired from the pregnancy, and Korath had invited Ethan to stay for a drink. The commander held a glass of amber liquid that caught the dying light. You see people in need, and your first instinct is to help. My first instinct is to assess what I can gain from the situation. That's not always a bad thing, Ethan said carefully. You built an empire by thinking strategically. Perhaps. Korath took a sip of his drink. But empires are cold things, Ethan. They are built on transactions, on calculated risks, on the belief that some lives matter more than others. I have operated under that belief for 40 years. He paused. And then a human boy saves my wife and asks for a water filter. It should not have shaken me as much as it did. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood in comfortable silence, the wind carrying the scent of the gardens below. "My business partners are concerned," Korath said eventually. "They believe I am becoming soft, sentimental. They point to the infrastructure improvements, the scholarship fund. They say I am wasting resources on humans who will never provide a return on investment." "What do you tell them?" Ethan asked. Korath's smile was thin and sharp. "I tell them it is my fortune to waste. But they are not satisfied with that answer. There are whispers, rumors that I am losing my edge, that I am no longer fit to lead the corporation." He turned to face Ethan, his ice-blue eyes unreadable. "I am telling you this because you should know what your simple act of kindness has set in motion. There are people in my organization who see this friendship as a liability, and they may act to eliminate that liability." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You think they'd come after me? I think they will do whatever they believe necessary to protect their interests." Korath set his glass down on the balcony railing. "I have increased security around the colony, discreetly. You and your mother will be watched, protected. But you should be careful, Ethan. The powerful do not like being challenged, and you have challenged the very foundation of how we operate." "I didn't mean to challenge anything," Ethan said. "I was just trying to help." "I know," Korath said quietly. "That is what makes it so dangerous." Ethan should have taken the warning more seriously. But life in New Haven continued much as it always had. Work at the shop, helping his mother, occasional visits to the estate. The scholarship fund was taking shape, and Ceres had begun interviewing candidates with Ethan's help. Watching her interact with the nervous teenagers who came to meet her, seeing how gently she put them at ease, Ethan understood why Korath loved her. She had a gift for seeing the best in people, for making them feel valued. It was during one of these interviews, 4 weeks after the crash, that everything went wrong. Ethan was walking home from the estate, taking the long route through the Greenway, because the evening was pleasant and he needed time to think. The scholarship had received over 200 applications, and the decision about who to select weighed on him. These were kids like him, smart, hard-working, desperate for a chance. Choosing 20 meant turning away 180 others. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the figures until they stepped out of the shadows. There were 3 of them, all Draxian, wearing dark clothing without insignia. They moved with military precision, spreading out to block his path. Ethan's heart kicked into overdrive. He looked around. The Greenway was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows that hid more than they revealed. "Ethan Cole," the lead figure said. He was shorter than Korath, but broader, with a scar running down the left side of his face. "You will come with us." Quietly. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, proud that his voice didn't shake. "What do you want?" "We represent interests that have been compromised by your interference," the scarred Draxian said. His tone was flat, professional. "Commander Korath has become a liability. His sentimentality threatens significant financial interests. You are the source of that sentimentality. Remove you and he will return to his senses." "You're going to kill me," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, an unfortunate accident, a mugging gone wrong. These things happen in human colonies. The Draxian drew a weapon, a sleek energy pistol that hummed with charge. "If you cooperate, it will be quick. If you resist, it will not." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight 3 armed Draxians. He couldn't outrun them, but he could buy time. Korath said he increased security. "There are watchers. You kill me, they'll see." The scarred Draxian smiled. "We eliminated the watchers 30 minutes ago. No one is coming to save you, human." Ethan's breath caught. This was real. This was happening. He was going to die in the Greenway, 20 meters from where he'd saved Ceres's life, and no one would ever know the truth. Then a voice cut through the darkness, cold and deadly. "You are mistaken." The Draxians spun, weapons raised. Veyron Korath stepped into the light, flanked by 6 guards in full combat armor. The commander's face was a mask of fury, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the air seem to crackle. "Commander," the scarred Draxian said, his voice faltering, "we were acting in the corporation's best interests. You have been compromised by this human. You were merely committing treason." Korath interrupted. His voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You were conspiring to murder a citizen under my protection, a child who saved my wife's life, and you thought I would not notice." He took a step forward, and the conspirators backed away. "I have suspected for weeks that there were those within my organization who opposed my recent decisions, so I set a trap. I leaked false information about my security arrangements. I waited to see who would take the bait. His smile was razor-sharp. Congratulations. You have volunteered to serve as an example. Commander, please, the scarred Draxian began. Silence. Korath's guards moved forward, disarming the conspirators with brutal efficiency. You will be taken into custody. You will be interrogated. And when I have extracted every name, every detail of your pathetic coup, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of Federation law. And then I will destroy you financially, professionally, and socially. You will wish I had simply killed you. He turned to Ethan, his expression softening fractionally. Are you harmed? Ethan shook his head, his whole body trembling with adrenaline. No, I'm okay. They didn't touch me. Good. Korath gestured to one of his guards. Escort Mr. Cole to the estate. He will stay there tonight under my personal protection. In the morning, we will discuss more permanent security arrangements. I need to tell my mom. Your mother is already at the estate, Korath said. I had her collected the moment my security team detected the threat. She is with Ceres, and she is safe. Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. One of the guards steadied him, her grip gentle but firm. Korath watched the conspirators being led away, then turned back to Ethan. I apologize, he said, and the words sounded like they cost him. I should have anticipated this. I should have protected you better. You did protect me, Ethan said. You were here, you stopped them. Barely. Korath's jaw tightened. They came within moments of succeeding. That is unacceptable. He moved closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, an unfamiliar gesture, awkward but genuine. You asked me once why I kept my promise about the water filters. The truth is, I did not fully understand it myself, but I understand now. You saved what I love most in this universe, and in doing so, you showed me that there is more to life than profit margins and power. He paused, his ice-blue eyes meeting Ethan's. I will not let anyone harm you for that lesson. You have my word. And unlike the promises I made before I met you, this one I will keep because I want to, not because I feel obligated. Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Korath stepped back, his composure returning. Come, he said. Let us return to the estate. Your mother will want to see that you are safe, and Ceres will want to hear about this disaster so she can berate me for my poor planning. Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling. She's scary when she's angry. Terrifying, Korath agreed. It is one of the reasons I love her. They walked together toward the waiting transport, the guards forming a protective circle around them. Behind them, the greenway fell silent once more, the shadows reclaiming the space where Ethan had almost died. But he was alive, and Veyron Korath, the cold, calculating magnate who had once looked at him with disdain, had saved him, not because it benefited him, but because it was the right thing to do. The lesson, it seemed, went both ways. When they arrived at the estate, Sarah was waiting in the entrance hall, her face pale with fear. The moment she saw Ethan, she ran to him, wrapping him in a hug so tight he could barely breathe. Sarah stood nearby, one hand on her swollen belly, her eyes wet with tears. Thank the stars, Sarah whispered. When they came to get me, when they said there was a threat. I'm okay, Mom, Ethan said. Commander Korath stopped them. Sarah pulled back, looking at Korath with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and fury. They tried to kill my son. They did, Korath said simply, and they will pay for that attempt with everything they have. I give you my word. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you for protecting him, for... Her voice cracked. For being there. It is I who should be thanking him, Korath said. Your son has given me more than he knows. He turned to one of the servants hovering nearby. Prepare the guest wing. Mrs. Cole and her son will be staying with us until the security situation is resolved. Ensure they have everything they need. As the servant hurried off, Ceres moved forward, taking Ethan's hands in hers. You must have been so frightened, she said softly. I was, Ethan admitted, but your husband showed up just in time. He has a talent for that, Ceres said, smiling at Korath. The commander's expression softened when he looked at his wife, the harsh edges melting away. Come, Ceres said, let us have tea, or something stronger if you prefer. Tonight has been traumatic enough without standing in hallways. As they moved deeper into the estate, Ethan glanced back at Korath. The commander was speaking quietly with his head of security, his face hard with determination. But when he caught Ethan looking, he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of solidarity. They had tried to kill him to break Korath's transformation. Instead, they had cemented it, and Ethan suspected that before this was over, The universe would learn what happened when you threatened what Veyron Korath had decided to protect. The guest wing of the Korath estate was larger than Ethan's entire apartment in New Haven. His room had a bed that could have fit 4 people, windows overlooking the gardens, and a bathroom with fixtures that looked like they belonged in a museum. His mother had been given the adjoining suite, and despite the luxury, Ethan could hear her pacing late into the night, unable to sleep. He couldn't blame her. He lay awake himself, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in the greenway when the scarred Draxian had raised his weapon. How close had he come to dying? Seconds? Less? Around 3 in the morning, Ethan gave up on sleep and wandered into the hallway. The estate was quiet at this hour, lit by soft ambient lighting that adjusted as he moved. He found his way to the solarium where he'd first met Ceres, drawn by the sound of voices. Korath was there, standing at the windows with his back to the door. He was still dressed, though his robes were rumpled and his hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled. Ceres sat on the sofa, wrapped in a robe, her hand resting on her belly. They were speaking in their native language, their voices low and urgent. Ethan started to back away, not wanting to intrude, but Korath turned. "Ethan," he said, "I thought you would be asleep." "Couldn't," Ethan admitted. "I keep thinking about what almost happened." Ceres patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit. We were just discussing the same thing." Ethan entered, settling onto the sofa. Up close, he could see the strain on both their faces. Korath looked older somehow, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "The interrogations have begun," Korath said without preamble. "The conspirators are cooperating. They are naming names, providing evidence. It appears the plot extended higher than I anticipated." "How high?" Ethan asked. 3 members of my board of directors, 7 senior executives, 24 lower-level employees across 4 sectors. Korath's voice was flat, but his hands were clenched into fists. "They plan to eliminate you, stage a vote of no confidence and remove me from leadership of my own corporation. They believe that without you to distract me, they could maneuver me back into line. Failing that, they would remove me entirely." "Because you've been helping humans," Ethan said quietly. "Because I stopped behaving like a Draxian," Korath corrected. "Because I allowed compassion to influence business decisions. Because I acknowledged that a human child had value beyond what he could provide me." He turned to face the window again. "In their eyes, I committed the unforgivable sin of seeing you as an equal." Ceres reached out and took Ethan's hand. "What Veyron is not saying is that he has spent the last 6 hours systematically destroying the careers of everyone involved. He has frozen assets, terminated contracts, and filed criminal charges. By morning, 24 Draxians will wake to find their lives in ruins." "They tried to murder a child," Korath said, his voice hard. "They deserve worse." "I'm not arguing with you, my love," Ceres said gently. "I am simply pointing out that you are doing all of this not for profit or power, but because you believe it is right. That is not the Veyron Korath I married." Korath was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, his ice-blue eyes meeting Ethan's. "Do you know what I did when I was your age, Ethan?" Ethan shook his head. "I was apprenticed to my father in the family business. He was a hard man, brilliant, but cruel. He taught me that weakness was intolerable, that sentiment was for those who could not afford to be strong. When I was 17, your age, he ordered me to fire an entire division of workers because their productivity had declined by 3%. 3%. I did it without question. 200 families lost their income because I followed my father's orders." He moved to the sofa, sitting on the opposite end. "I have spent 40 years building an empire on that foundation, and in 40 years I never questioned whether it was right. I simply assumed that power justified itself." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now I wonder how many lives I have ruined in pursuit of profit, how many people I have dismissed because they could not provide value, how many opportunities for good I have ignored because they did not benefit me directly." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You have made me question everything, Ethan Cole, and I hate you a little for it." The words should have stung, but Korath's tone held no malice. If anything, there was a note of respect. "But I also respect you more than most people I have ever met," Korath continued, "because you risked your life without hesitation, because you asked for nothing for yourself, because you showed me that there is strength in compassion, power in humility. These are lessons I should have learned decades ago." Ceres squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes shining. "Do you see what you have done? You have given my husband something he did not know he was missing." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "A conscience," Korath said wryly. and it is profoundly inconvenient. Despite the tension, Ethan found himself smiling. Sorry about that. Do not apologize, Korath said. Own what you have done. You changed the course of a man's life. That is no small thing. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars through the solarium windows. Then Ceres spoke, her voice thoughtful. The conspirators wanted to remove Ethan to restore the old Veyron, but they have achieved the opposite. They have forced you to choose, my love. And you chose him. You chose compassion over profit, protection over power. There is no going back now. Korath looked at his wife, then at Ethan. No, he agreed quietly. There is not. The next morning, the galactic news feeds exploded with the story. Veyron Korath, one of the wealthiest and most powerful Draxians in the Federation, had exposed a massive conspiracy within his own corporation. The details were shocking. Assassination plots, corporate espionage, fraud. But what captured the public's attention was the reason behind it all. A human teenager who had saved Korath's wife and refused payment. Ethan watched the coverage from the estate's media room, his mother beside him. The talking heads debated endlessly. Some praised Korath's actions, others called him a traitor to Draxian values. Still others speculated about what this meant for human-alien relations. You're famous, his mother said, her voice tight with worry. Everyone in the galaxy knows your name now. I didn't ask for this, Ethan said. I know, honey. Sarah put her arm around him. But sometimes the right thing brings attention whether we want it or not. Korath appeared in the doorway, flanked by Veyron. Ethan, there are several news organizations requesting interviews. I have declined them all on your behalf, but you should know that the pressure will continue. What do I do? Ethan asked. You tell the truth, Korath said simply. If you choose to speak, but you are under no obligation to explain yourself to anyone. What you did from the heart. That requires no justification. He crossed to stand before them. However, I must address the practical realities. The conspirators have been neutralized, but there may be others. I am increasing your security detail. You and your mother will continue to stay here until I am confident the threat has passed. For how long? Sarah asked. As long as necessary. Korath's expression softened slightly. I know this is not your home. I know you have lives you wish to return to, but I will not risk Ethan's safety, or yours. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, Commander, for everything you've done. It is insufficient recompense for what your son has given me, Korath said, but it is what I can offer. Over the next week, life at the estate settled into a strange new rhythm. Ethan continued working on the scholarship fund with Ceres, who seemed to grow more radiant with each passing day, despite her advancing pregnancy. Sarah was given a position managing household accounts. Korath insisted it was not charity but pragmatism, as her organizational skills far exceeded those of his current staff. And Korath himself changed in ways that were subtle but profound. He spent more time with Ceres, less time in meetings. He walked the estate grounds with Ethan, asking questions about his life, his dreams, his worldview. He even attended one of the scholarship interviews, watching quietly as a nervous girl from the mining sector spoke about wanting to study engineering. After the interview, as they walked back through the gardens, Korath spoke. That girl, the one who wants to study engineering. Kira, Ethan said. Her father died in a mining accident. She's been supporting her younger siblings. She reminds me of you, Korath said. Determined, resilient, fighting against a universe that has given her very little. We should give her the scholarship, Ethan said. I agree. Korath paused by a fountain, watching the water cascade into the basin below. I have been thinking about something you said, about helping people who cannot help themselves. Yeah? I want to expand the scholarship, not just 20 students, but 200, not just this sector, but across the Federation. I want to create opportunities for humans and other marginalized species to rise above their circumstances. Ethan stared at him. That would cost millions. I have millions, Korath said with a slight smile. More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Why not use it for something that matters? Because a month ago you would have said that was a waste of resources. A month ago I was a different man. Korath looked at him. You did that, Ethan. You and your impossible, impractical compassion. You showed me that wealth without purpose is meaningless, that power without responsibility is corruption. He turned back to the fountain. I cannot undo 40 years of selfishness, but I can try to do better going forward. And I will. Not because it benefits me, but because you taught me that some things are worth doing simply because they are right. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Thank you," he managed. "Do not thank me," Korath said quietly. "I am the one in your debt, and I suspect I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay it." That evening, Korath called a press conference. It was broadcast across the Federation, watched by billions. Ethan and his mother watched from the solarium as Korath stood before a wall of cameras, his expression calm and resolute. "I am Veyron Korath," he began, "and I have an announcement to make. 4 weeks ago, my wife and unborn child were involved in a crash. They would have died if not for the actions of a human boy named Ethan Cole. He saved them without hesitation, without thought for reward, without concern for his own safety." He paused, letting the words sink in. "When I offered him payment, he refused. Instead, he asked me to repair a water filtration system at a medical clinic in his colony. That single request challenged everything I believed about the nature of power, wealth, and responsibility." The cameras zoomed in as Korath continued. "I have spent my life building an empire. I have accumulated wealth beyond measure, influence beyond calculation. And in that pursuit, I forgot something essential, that wealth and power mean nothing if they are not used to improve the lives of others." He looked directly into the camera. "Ethan Cole reminded me of that. And today I am announcing the establishment of the Korath Foundation for Educational Excellence. This foundation will provide full scholarships to 200 students each year, drawn from underprivileged communities across the Federation. It will be funded entirely from my personal fortune, and it will operate in perpetuity." The assembled reporters erupted with questions, but Korath raised a hand for silence. "I am not doing this for recognition. I am not doing this to improve my reputation. I am doing this because a 17-year-old human boy showed me that compassion is not weakness, that helping others is not wasteful, that the measure of a person or a species is not in what they accumulate, but in what they give." He stepped back from the podium. "That is all I have to say. The foundation will begin accepting applications next month. Thank you." As the feed cut away to analysis and commentary, Ethan sat in stunned silence. His mother was crying, her hand over her mouth. Ceres, who had been watching with them, was smiling through her own tears. "He meant every word," she said softly. "My husband does not speak lightly. What he has promised, he will deliver." "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he do all this?" Ceres looked at him with infinite gentleness. "Because you showed him who he could be, and he decided that person was worth becoming." Korath returned an hour later, looking exhausted but satisfied. He found them still in the solarium and sank into a chair with a sigh. "Well," he said, "that is done. My board is furious. My remaining advisors think I have lost my mind, and I have committed a significant portion of my fortune to an endeavor that will generate no return on investment." He looked at Ethan and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his face. "I have never felt better in my life." Ethan laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "You're insane." "Perhaps," Korath agreed, "but if this is madness, I prefer it to the sanity I lived with before." He reached over and clasped Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you, my young friend, for saving my wife, for challenging my assumptions, for being exactly who you are without apology or compromise. You have given me more than you will ever know." As the night deepened and the stars emerged above the estate, Ethan realized that he had not just saved 2 lives in that lake. He had changed the course of history, in a small way perhaps, but a real one. And that, he thought, was worth more than any amount of credits in the galaxy. 6 weeks after the press conference, life had begun to find a new equilibrium. The Korath Foundation was operational, with offices in 3 systems and a staff of 20 dedicated administrators. Applications poured in by the thousands, desperate, hopeful letters from families across the Federation who saw in the Foundation their only chance at a better future. Ethan spent his days helping to review applications, working alongside a team that Korath had personally assembled. His mother had fully integrated into the estate staff, managing accounts with an efficiency that made even Korath raise an eyebrow in approval. And though they still missed their small apartment in New Haven, they had come to think of the estate as something close to home. Korath himself had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. He smiled more often. He spent evenings with Ceres instead of locked in his office. He walked through the gardens, actually noticing the flowers his groundskeepers had tended for years. And he spoke with Ethan not as a curiosity, or even as a friend, but as something approaching family. "You have become part of our household," Korath said one afternoon as they sat in his study, reviewing quarterly reports. Ceres speaks of you as if you were a younger brother, and I find myself— He paused, searching for words. I find myself considering what kind of example I am setting. For you, for our child when they arrive. You're doing fine, Ethan said with a smile. Better than fine. High praise from the boy who made me question my entire existence, Korath said dryly. But his eyes were warm. Ceres was due in 3 weeks. The medical staff had prepared a birthing suite in the estate's medical wing, equipped with the finest technology the Federation could offer. Dr. Talara, the family's personal physician, checked on Ceres daily, monitoring both mother and child with meticulous care. Everything is progressing beautifully, Dr. Talara reported after one such examination. The child is healthy, the mother is strong. If all continues as expected, you will have a son or daughter in your arms within the month. Korath and Ceres had decided not to learn the child's sex, preferring to be surprised, but they had chosen names. Jaren for a boy, Liana for a girl. Both names carried meaning in Draxian culture, speaking of strength, wisdom, and hope. Do you think the child will grow up in a better universe? Ceres asked one evening, as she, Korath, and Ethan sat in the solarium. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the child move within. One where humans and Draxians see each other as equals? I hope so, Ethan said. But even if they don't, your child will grow up knowing that compassion matters. That's more than a lot of kids get. They will grow up knowing that a human boy saved their mother's life, Korath added. That will shape them in ways we cannot predict. Ceres smiled, her golden eyes glistening. They will grow up knowing Uncle Ethan. The word hung in the air. Uncle. Ethan felt his throat tighten. If that's okay, Ceres added quickly. I do not presume— It's more than okay, Ethan said, his voice thick. It's an honor. Korath reached over and gripped Ethan's shoulder. You are family, Ethan Cole. That is not a title I bestow lightly, but it is one you have earned 100 times over. 2 weeks later, in the small hours of the morning, everything changed. Ethan was asleep when the knock came, sharp, urgent, insistent. He stumbled out of bed, opening the door to find one of the medical staff, her face pale with urgency. It's Lady Ceres, she said. The labor has started. Commander Korath requests your presence. Ethan threw on clothes and ran through the corridors, his heart pounding. The medical wing was a flurry of controlled chaos, doctors moving with practiced efficiency, monitors beeping, voices speaking in calm, measured tones. Korath stood outside the birthing suite, his face drawn with worry. Ethan, he said, relief flooding his features. Thank the stars. Ceres asked for you. Is she okay? Is the baby— She is in labor. It came early, but not dangerously so. Dr. Talara says everything is proceeding normally. Korath ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of helplessness that Ethan had never seen from him before. But Ceres wanted you here. Both of us. She said— His voice cracked slightly. She said she wants the person who saved her life to be here when she brings new life into the world. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. Can I see her? Korath nodded and led him into the suite. The room was filled with soft light and quiet music, designed to be calming. Ceres lay in a reclined bed, her face flushed with effort, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But when she saw Ethan, she smiled. Ethan, she breathed. You came. Of course I came, Ethan said, crossing to her side. He took her hand and she gripped it with surprising strength. I wanted you here, she said. You and Veyron, the two people who matter most. She looked at her husband, who had taken her other hand. I am frightened, my love. What if something goes wrong? What if— Nothing will go wrong, Korath said, but his voice shook. Dr. Talara is the best in the Federation. You are strong. Our child is strong. And I'm here, Ethan added. Though you're not alone. Ceres nodded, tears streaming down her face. Stay with me, both of you, please. We are not going anywhere, Korath said firmly. For the next 6 hours, Ethan and Korath stayed by Ceres's side. The labor was long and difficult, each contraction racking her body with pain. Korath held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement in their native tongue. Ethan stood on her other side, offering what comfort he could. Cool cloths for her forehead, ice chips when she needed them, a steady presence in the chaos. Sarah arrived an hour into the labor, having been summoned by the staff. She stood with Ethan, her arm around his shoulders, lending her strength. She had given birth once herself, had survived that ordeal, and her presence seemed to calm Ceres in ways the medical staff could not. You can do this, Sarah said softly during one of the worst contractions. I know it hurts, I know you are tired, but you are stronger than you know, and soon you will hold your baby. That makes it all worthwhile." Ceres clung to those words, repeating them like a mantra. "Soon, soon I will hold my baby." Dr. Talara worked with calm precision, monitoring the child's vitals, adjusting Ceres's position, preparing for the final stage. "You are almost there, Lady Ceres. One more push." "The head is crowning," Ceres screamed, a sound of pure effort and determination. Korath's face was pale, his hand gripping hers so tightly Ethan thought he might break her fingers. But Ceres did not complain. She bore down with everything she had, and then a thin, reedy cry filled the room. Dr. Talara lifted a small, squirming form, slick with birth fluids, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A healthy, beautiful girl." Korath let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Ceres collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Dr. Talara placed the baby on her chest, skin to skin. The infant was tiny, her skin the same pale lavender as her mother's, her eyes squeezed shut as she wailed her displeasure at being thrust into the cold, bright world. "Liana," Ceres whispered, her hands cradling the baby's head. "My Liana, my daughter." Korath leaned down, pressing his forehead to Ceres's, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, the most powerful Draxian in the Federation was simply a father, overcome with joy and relief and love. Ethan stepped back, giving them space, his own tears falling freely. Sarah held him close, and together they watched as the small family shared their first moments together. After a few minutes, Ceres looked up, her eyes finding Ethan. "Come here," she said softly. "Come meet her." Ethan approached, his hands trembling. The baby had stopped crying, her tiny mouth working as she nuzzled against her mother's chest. She was perfect, impossibly small, impossibly fragile, impossibly precious. "Liana," Ceres said, her voice full of love and exhaustion, "this is your Uncle Ethan. He saved your mother's life before you were born, and now he is part of our family, forever." The baby's eyes opened, golden like her mother's, and for a moment she seemed to stare directly at Ethan. Then she yawned, a tiny, kitten-like sound, and closed her eyes again. Korath moved to stand beside Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for everything." "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," Ethan said. They stood together, watching as Dr. Talara completed the post-birth procedures, as nurses checked Liana's vitals and wrapped her in soft blankets, as Ceres drifted into an exhausted sleep with her daughter in her arms. And in that moment, Ethan understood something fundamental about family, that it was not always about blood, but about choice, about who you stood beside in the hardest moments, about who you fought to protect and who fought to protect you in return. Later, as the sun rose over the estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Korath and Ethan stood on one of the balconies. Below, the gardens stretched out in ordered beauty, the morning dew glinting on leaves and petals. Korath held a glass of celebratory wine, though he had barely touched it. "A daughter," he said softly. "I have a daughter." "She's beautiful," Ethan said. "She is." Korath turned to look at him. "When you pulled Ceres from that lake, you saved not just one life, but two. My wife and my daughter both live because of your courage. I can never repay that debt, Ethan, but I will spend the rest of my life trying." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said. "Watching Liana being born, seeing how much you love her and Ceres, that's payment enough." Korath shook his head. "You are too generous, too selfless. It is both your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability." He set down his glass and turned to face Ethan fully. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to consider it carefully before answering." "Okay," Ethan said cautiously. "I want to formally adopt you. Not legally. You have a mother, and I would never seek to replace that bond. But culturally, spiritually, in Draxian tradition, adoption is a recognition of family by choice. It would make you my son in all but blood. It would give you the rights and protections of my house. And it would ensure that you are always cared for, always protected, always valued." Ethan stared at him, speechless. Korath continued, his voice steady but emotional. "You have changed my life, Ethan Cole. You have made me a better husband, a better leader, and now, I hope, a better father. I want my daughter to grow up knowing you, learning from you, seeing in you the kind of person I spent 40 years not being." He paused. "You are already family to us. I simply wish to make it official." Ethan's vision blurred with tears. He thought of his father, dead 5 years now, and how much he still missed him. He thought of his mother who had worked herself to exhaustion to give him a better life. And he thought of this alien magnate who had started as a stranger, become an unlikely friend, and was now offering something Ethan had never dared to imagine, a place to belong. "I would be honored," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "More honored than I can say." Korath pulled him into an embrace, awkward at first, then warming, then fierce. "Then it is done," he said. "You are my son, and Liana is your sister, and when she is old enough to understand, I will tell her how you saved her life before she even drew breath." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, two figures from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unexpected of places. And somewhere in the medical wing, a baby girl slept peacefully, unaware that her life had been shaped by an act of compassion, performed by a human boy who had asked for nothing but the chance to help others. The universe, Ethan thought, had a strange sense of poetry, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt truly at peace. 3 years passed. In the grand sweep of galactic history, 3 years was nothing, a heartbeat, a blink. But for the people whose lives had been touched by a single act of compassion on the shores of a murky lake, those 3 years changed everything. The Korath Foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had started as a promise to fund 200 scholarships had expanded into a network of educational centers, vocational training programs, and medical clinics across 17 systems. Thousands of students, human, Draxian, and dozens of other species, had received opportunities they never would have had otherwise, and at the heart of it all was a simple principle, that everyone deserved a chance, regardless of where they came from or who they were. Ethan Cole, now 20 years old, had become the Foundation's youngest director. He split his time between the Korath estate and the Foundation's headquarters on the core world of Talaxis Prime, overseeing programs, meeting with applicants, and speaking at conferences about the power of compassion in an often cruel universe. He had grown taller, his boyish features sharpening into those of a young man, but his eyes still held the same warmth and determination that had compelled him to dive into a lake 3 years ago. His mother, Sarah, had risen to become Korath's chief financial officer, managing the vast fortune with an efficiency and integrity that had earned her respect, even from those who initially dismissed her as just a human. She and Veyron had developed a working relationship built on mutual respect. He valued her honesty and practical wisdom, while she appreciated his willingness to listen and learn. And then there was Liana. The little girl was 3 years old now, with her mother's lavender skin and golden eyes, but her father's sharp intelligence and stubborn determination. She had also inherited something neither parent possessed, an absolute, unwavering affection for her uncle Ethan. From the moment she could walk, she followed him around the estate like a shadow, chattering in a mix of Draxian and standard galactic, demanding stories and attention, and endless games of hide-and-seek in the gardens. "Ethan, Ethan," she called one afternoon, running through the solarium with a toy starship clutched in her small hands. "Come play. I'm a pilot and you're the space monster." Ethan looked up from the datapad he'd been reviewing, a smile already forming. "Space monster again? I was a space monster yesterday." "Because you're good at it," Liana said seriously, as if this explained everything. She climbed onto the sofa beside him, pressing her face close to his. "Please? Mama said you've been working too hard." "Your mother is probably right," Ethan admitted. He set aside the datapad and scooped Liana into his arms, making her shriek with delighted laughter. "All right, little pilot. Let's see if you can escape the terrible space monster of, Nebula 7. He chased her through the gardens, roaring theatrically while she giggled and flew her starship through imaginary asteroid fields. Ceres watched from the terrace, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She was pregnant again, due in 2 months, her expression soft with contentment. "They are beautiful together," she said, as Korath joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "They are," Korath agreed. "Sometimes I wonder if Liana loves him more than she loves me." "She loves you differently," Ceres said. "You are her father. Strong, protective, the foundation of her world. But Ethan is her hero. He is young enough to play with her, wise enough to teach her, and kind enough that she feels safe showing him everything in her heart." Korath was quiet for a moment, watching as Ethan let Liana capture him with an imaginary net, falling dramatically to the grass while she declared victory. "He has made me a better father," Korath said finally. "Watching how he interacts with her, how patient he is, how he sees the world through her eyes, it has taught me things I never learned from my own father." "You are an excellent father," Ceres said firmly. "But yes, Ethan has taught us both much about love, about seeing people for who they are, not what they can provide." That evening, the family gathered for dinner in the estate's formal dining room, though formal had become a relative term since Liana's arrival. The toddler sat in a high chair between her parents, determined to feed herself despite the resulting mess. Ethan sat across from them, with Sarah beside him, and the conversation flowed easily. Talk of foundation business, of colony developments, of Liana's recent accomplishment of counting to 20 in 3 different languages. "She is brilliant," Korath said, dabbing food from his daughter's chin with a napkin. "Obviously she gets that from me." "Obviously," Ceres said with mock solemnity. "Her stubbornness, however, is entirely from you as well." "I am not stubborn. I am determined. There is a difference." "Not according to your wife," Sarah said with a smile, and everyone laughed. After dinner, as Ceres put Liana to bed, Korath invited Ethan to his study. The room had changed over the years, less sterile, more lived in. Holographs of Liana and Ceres adorned the shelves alongside the business awards. A child's drawing hung on the wall behind the desk, depicting what was presumably the family in bright, chaotic colors. Korath poured 2 glasses of Draxian brandy and handed one to Ethan. "I want to show you something," he said. He activated a holo display, and a cascade of data appeared. Financial reports, testimonials, demographic analyses. "These are the Foundation's 3-year results. We have provided scholarships to 4,300 students. We have built medical clinics in 73 colonies. We have trained over 10,000 individuals in vocational skills. The economic impact on marginalized communities has been measured in the billions of credits." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "But more than that, we have changed lives, real lives. There is a girl on Proxima Colony who is now studying medicine because of our scholarship, a boy on Talaxis who escaped poverty to become an engineer, families who have clean water, children who have hope, entire communities that have been transformed." Ethan stared at the data, feeling overwhelmed. "All of this because of a water filter. All of this because you showed me that wealth means nothing if it is not used to help others," Korath corrected. "You planted a seed, Ethan. This is the forest that grew from it." He collapsed the holo display and turned to face Ethan directly. "I have made many decisions in my life. Some good, many questionable, a few I deeply regret. But the decision to honor your simple request, to fix that filter instead of dismissing you, that is the best decision I have ever made. Second only to marrying Ceres." "I'm sure she'd be thrilled to hear she's tied for first place," Ethan said with a grin. Korath's expression softened into something approaching a smile. "She already knows. She is the one who told me to have this conversation with you." He sat on the edge of his desk, his posture more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen. "You are 20 years old now, an adult. You have proven yourself 1,000 times over, as a director, as a friend, as a brother to my daughter. And I have been thinking about the future, about what happens when I am gone." "You're not going anywhere," Ethan said quickly. "Not soon, I hope, but eventually. And when that day comes, someone will need to lead the Foundation, to ensure that the work we have started continues, to protect the legacy we have built." He met Ethan's eyes. "I want that person to be you." Ethan felt his breath catch. "Veyron, I'm honored, but I'm human. Your board, your people, they're not going to accept." "Then they will need to adjust," Korath interrupted. "You have proven your worth 1,000 times over, and more importantly, you understand the Foundation's purpose in a way that no one else does. You live it. You breathe it. It is not a business venture to you, it is a calling." He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. "When I met you 3 years ago, I saw a foolish child asking for something worthless. Now I see the man who saved my family, changed my life, and helped me become someone worth being. If I am going to entrust our legacy to anyone, it will be you." Ethan joined him at the window, standing shoulder to shoulder. "I'll do my best, but I'm going to need help. A lot of help." "You will have it," Korath promised. "You will have resources, staff, advisors. You will have Ceres's wisdom and Sarah's guidance. And you will have something that I did not have when I started, a clear sense of purpose. You will not make the mistakes I made." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Korath spoke again, his voice quieter. "Do you ever regret it? Saving Ceres? It changed your entire life. You could have walked away, lived a simple existence in New Haven. Instead, you are here, carrying responsibilities that would crush most people twice your age." Ethan thought about the question, really thought about it. He thought about the quiet life he might have had, working at Marcus's shop, helping his mother, maybe finding a job off-world eventually. A simple life, a safe life. And then he thought about Liana's laughter, about the thousands of students whose lives had been transformed, about watching Veyron Korath become the man he was always capable of being. No, Ethan said firmly. I don't regret it. Not for a second. Yes, my life changed. But it changed in ways that matter. I've seen people get opportunities they never would have had. I've watched you and Ceres build a family. I've held Liana in my arms and known that she exists because I jumped into a lake without thinking. He turned to face Korath. That's not something to regret. That's something to be grateful for. Korath's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he pulled Ethan into a brief, fierce embrace. You are my son, he said quietly, in every way that matters, and I am proud of you, more proud than I have words to express. When they separated, both men's eyes were suspiciously bright. Korath cleared his throat. Well, enough sentiment for one evening. Ceres will mock me for being emotional. Your secret's safe with me, Ethan said with a smile. The next morning, Ethan woke early and walked through the gardens, enjoying the quiet before the household stirred. The estate had become as familiar to him as his old apartment in New Haven, every path, every flower, every hidden bench. He found himself at the fountain where he and Korath had stood 3 years ago, when the magnate had first begun to question his assumptions about the universe. I thought I might find you here. Ethan turned to see Ceres approaching, moving carefully with her pregnant belly. He hurried to offer her his arm, and she took it with a grateful smile. Could not sleep, she asked. Too much on my mind, Ethan admitted. Your husband offered me leadership of the foundation last night. I know. I encouraged him to. Ceres settled onto the fountain's edge with a sigh of relief. You are the right person for this, Ethan. You always have been. I'm not sure I'm ready. No one is ever truly ready for the responsibilities that matter, Ceres said. But readiness is less important than character, and you have more character than anyone I have ever met, human or Draxian. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. This child, like Liana, will grow up in a universe you helped create, one where compassion is valued, where helping others is seen as strength, not weakness. That is your legacy, Ethan Cole. Not just the foundation, but the change in how people see each other. That's a lot of pressure, Ethan said with a weak smile. Yes, but you do not carry it alone. You have us. You have your mother. You have thousands of people whose lives you have touched, who will stand beside you. She reached out and took his hand. And you have something else, the knowledge that one person can change the world, because you did exactly that. You dove into a lake without hesitation, and everything else followed from that single choice. Ethan felt his eyes sting with tears. Thank you, Ceres, for everything, for welcoming me into your family, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saved my life, Ceres said simply. Everything after that is just me trying to be worthy of that gift. They sat together as the sun rose, painting the gardens in gold and amber light, and in that moment, Ethan understood something fundamental about his journey. It had started with a simple act of compassion, jumping into cold water to save a stranger, but it had become something far larger, a movement, a legacy, a testament to the idea that kindness could reshape the universe. Later that day, news broke across the Federation. Veyron Korath had named a human as his successor to lead the Ceres Korath Foundation. The announcement sparked controversy, celebration, and endless debate. But Korath stood firm, releasing a statement that was reprinted in every major publication. 3 years ago, a human boy saved my wife's life and asked for nothing in return, except that I help others. That act of selfless compassion changed everything I believed about power, wealth, and purpose. Ethan Cole has proven himself not just capable, but exceptional. As a leader, as a humanitarian, as a person who embodies the values this foundation represents. If you cannot see beyond his species to recognize his merit, then you are exactly the kind of thinking we seek to change. The appointment stands. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Several Draxian board members resigned in protest. Financial analysts predicted the foundation would lose donors. Critics accused Korath of betraying his own people, of elevating a human above those who deserved the position more. Korath weathered it all with calm determination. And slowly, grudgingly, the opposition began to fracture, because the results spoke for themselves. Under Ethan's leadership, the foundation flourished. Applications increased, success stories multiplied, communities that had been forgotten found hope again. And in the Korath household, life continued. Liana grew from a toddler into a bright, curious child who loved her Uncle Ethan fiercely and asked endless questions about everything. The new baby, a boy named Jaron, arrived healthy and strong, with his father's ice-blue eyes and his mother's gentle disposition. Ceres and Veyron grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. 10 years after that fateful day at the lake, Ethan stood on a stage before thousands of people, accepting an award for humanitarian service. He was 30 now, confident and poised, but still carrying that essential kindness that had defined him at 17. Somewhere in the audience, his mother watched with tears of pride. Beside her sat Veyron and Ceres, with 13-year-old Liana and 10-year-old Jaron. As Ethan spoke about the importance of compassion, of seeing beyond species and status to recognize the inherent worth of every being, Liana leaned over to her father. "Papa," she whispered, "when I grow up, I want to be like Uncle Ethan." Veyron looked down at his daughter, brilliant, kind-hearted, determined to make the universe better, and smiled. "Then you will be exactly who you are meant to be." That night, the family gathered at the estate for dinner. It had become tradition. Every year on the anniversary of the day Ethan saved Ceres, they celebrated with a feast and stories. Liana insisted on hearing the rescue story again, even though she'd heard it hundreds of times. "Tell me the part where Uncle Ethan jumped in the water," she demanded, her eyes shining. Ethan obliged, describing the crash, the desperate swim, the CPR on the muddy shore. Liana hung on every word, and even young Jaron listened intently. "And then your father showed up," Ethan said, "and offered me 50,000 credits, which you turned down like an idiot," Veyron interjected with fondness. "Which I turned down because I knew what would help more people," Ethan corrected. "And that's why you're my hero," Liana said firmly, "because you think about other people first." Ceres reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. "She is right, you know. You are a hero. Not because of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though those certainly happened, but because you showed us how to live with open hearts. That is the rarest and most precious gift." As the evening wore on and the children were put to bed, Ethan found himself back at that same fountain in the garden. This time it was Veyron who found him there. "Contemplating your legacy?" the older Draxian asked, settling onto the fountain's edge with a slight groan. "I used to do that more when I was younger. Now I'm too tired, just thinking about how strange life is," Ethan said. "How one choice can change everything." "Indeed." Veyron looked up at the stars, visible between the garden's trees. "Do you know what the hardest part was? Not the money, not the work, not even the criticism from my peers. The hardest part was admitting that I had been wrong, that I had lived 40 years according to principles that were fundamentally flawed, that a human child understood something essential that I had missed entirely." He turned to Ethan, his ice-blue eyes warm in the moonlight. "But that admission, that willingness to change, gave me everything that matters. A family I cherish, a purpose worth pursuing, a son who is not of my blood but is mine nonetheless. I would make that trade 1,000 times over." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You gave me everything too. A home, a purpose, a family. I jumped in a lake to save a stranger, and I found a father." They embraced, two figures from different worlds who had become family through choice and compassion. "Come," Veyron said eventually. "Ceres will worry if we stay out too late, and tomorrow we have work to do." The Foundation received 5,000 new applications this week. They will not review themselves. As they walked back to the estate together, Ethan looked up at the stars and thought about all the lives that had been changed. Not just his own, but thousands of others. Students who had found hope, families who had found healing, communities that had found a future. All because one 17-year-old boy had seen someone in need and decided to help without thought for reward or recognition, or anything beyond the simple truth that it was the right thing to do. The universe, Ethan had learned, remembered such acts, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, it rewarded them with something more valuable than any fortune, with love, with family, with the knowledge that your life had mattered. As he reached the estate's entrance, he glanced back at the gardens, at the fountain, at the path that led to the greenway and the lake beyond. That was where it had all started, where a crash had brought two worlds together, where a simple act of kindness had changed everything. And though he could not see it from here, Ethan knew that somewhere in the darkness, the lake still reflected the stars, quiet, patient, eternal, waiting for the next person brave enough to dive into its depths and pull someone to safety, waiting for the next story to begin. The end.